All right, JAG University, episode 3 already. We're cranking them out. Classes in session. We're going to talk about the shh.
That's the signal for assault and battery.
It's the two letters in the alphabet, right? The first two letters. It's interesting that, property owners, specifically multifamily, really any business owner, right, on a liability policy, assault and battery is one of those things that just nobody wants to commit to it. It remains silent, so you're covered, or there's a sublimit or specifically excluded. Why do you think they do that?
Yeah, it's pretty weird because your best possible outcome is for your insurance company to have no stance on assault and battery.
It's interesting.
For them
right?
to not even talk about it. That's the best case scenario.
Don't ask, don't tell.
Don't ask, don't tell. If you even see the words assault and battery somewhere on your policy, that's how you know, okay, they're limiting me or they're excluding me somewhere.
Or you're not covered.
And if you don't see it anywhere on your quote, then that's your assumption to have full limits. But, carriers don't really want to say, I'm covering you for $1 million per occurrence in assault and battery, because they want to maintain some sort of out in court should they be able to find something. It's a little bit unfortunate, but it's the best case scenario right now.
And it's a stance you see commonly, right? It's across the board with every carrier. Your background in the previous life on the underwriting side, what was kind of the response you'd get from some of the carriers, right?
Yeah, so if I had an account with full assault and battery, which would assume, okay, liability limits are $1 million, I have $1 million of assault and battery, I would have agents ask me, hi, okay, what's my limit for assault and battery? Is it full? Is it $1 million? And I would go back to my carrier underwriter. I'd ask them, do we have, and they go, there's no exclusion. That would be my answer. There's no limitation and no exclusion. But they wouldn't say you have $1 million per claim. They wouldn't say you have full limits. They would say we're silent. There's no exclusion. There's no sublimit. And they're very careful with how they choose their words there, just because there's a lot of weird extenuating circumstances that come with a crazy event like an assault and battery.
Sure. Which is one of the most likely, I would say, scenarios or potential landmines on any specifically multifamily habitational type risk, right?
Yeah.
People being involved, people visiting properties. There is something going to happen.
Exactly. You think habitational apartments, condominium associations. You can also think bars, clubs, restaurants. I mean, anywhere where people are drinking. It's assault and battery, it becomes more likely in those types of scenarios in those places. So it's something that it doesn't happen often, but when it does happen, it's never a small claim.
No, never. And so we talk about a lot about attention to the details, right? So what do you look for when you're buying a Geo policy? And you're in those specific industries or sectors, right? You're looking for what? A lot of times in the quote, you want to see the exclusions. Identify what's not covered first. Because you're right, you made a good point. If you see it on there, it's going to be excluded.
Yeah, it's not for a good reason. It's not to tell you, hey, we're giving you all the assault and battery you could ever need.
They're giving you the bad news up front.
Exactly.
That's
if
funny.
You see the words assault and battery on your insurance quote on the forms list, it's because they're either limiting you or excluding you. If you see no mention of it there, the safe assumption would be that the carrier is silent. So most likely, it just always depends on details. This isn't a hurricane, this isn't a fire. An assault and battery can have so many involved parties and so many things going on that it's hard to say, okay, it's covered here. That's why carriers take that silent stance. It's because it's just too hard to define. It's easier to just not address it.
And defend it.
How they see fit.
And it's interesting, on your end, how many times would you get that in writing from the carrier? It was always verbal, right?
Oh, yeah. If I would ask that question in email, I'd get a phone call back.
It was always a phone call. Hey, listen.
Exactly. And then I would have to follow suit with my client or my agent.
Right,
I would say, hey.
Right. It's like playing phone tag, right? The whole that telephone game.
Exactly. But ultimately, that your best case scenario is to be silent.
Right.
Because those silent policies are the ones that, if the responsible negligent parties, if it all kind of makes sense from a claim and case standpoint.
No, and then you have the duty to defend.
And duty to defend.
That's what you're gonna harp on.
And those are the policies that are paying out $1 million for a wrongful death due to assault and battery. It's that silent A and B policy.
So tips, right? Going into it as well. And I think a lot of times, let's just specifically focus on multifamily, right? A big sector we kind of play in. So we're looking at buying X apartment in X location. A lot of times doing a little research as a crime score as well. We focus a lot on the property rates, right? That's what the bank kind of focuses on. And then the casualty lines are kind of the second. Let's not even talk about the excess market right now, but casualty specifically. Any ideas of a few things they should focus on as far as making that location look a little bit better to a carrier?
Yeah. So you mentioned crime score. That's always a great starting point. If you just Google a zip code and crime score, a site called Best Places will come up, and a lot of underwriters and insurance carriers use that to see the crime score in comparison to the nation's average. So a lot of times it's a score from 0 to 100, and then anything, and they separate it by violent and property crime. And anything over 80, you're going to start getting flagged for a high likelihood of violent crime.
You might get declined off the bat.
They're either going to not write you. There's no shot they're giving you assault and battery in any capacity. If you're lucky, you get a sublimit. And if you get a sublimit, it's most likely because you're doing other things on your property. It's well lit. Maybe you have gated entry. You have security that has their own insurance that aren't your employees, especially if they're armed. You have to have another kind of policy to insulate you as the owner.
That's another rabbit hole.
Because that's another assault and battery rabbit hole in its own. I mean, what if one of your security guards get in a fight or shoot a guy? There's a lot of things wrapped up. So it's, if you have two comparative properties and the only difference is crime score and the safety of the neighborhood, that's going to be something that's going to greatly affect your ability to get competitive pricing, to get assault and battery coverage, and to insure your asset over time. It's risky. And especially, for example, we're in Miami, and it's a pretty crazy city.
You're 2 miles away from having a good time or being in trouble.
Exactly. One wrong turn, anybody you don't want at your establishment or at your property can be there. Or it could be just a guest or a cousin or some tenant,
right.
Or someone has a party and the invite got around to certain crowds that they didn't want to be there. Maybe there's some sort of disagreement, or people that don't like each other ended up in the same spot, and it just happens. So the whole point of that is that it's almost impossible to predict. It's not like a storm, or it's not like a fire, it's not like water damage where it's, okay, I'm going to inspect my pipes and inspect my plumbing and get a leak detector, and now I'm fairly certain I'm not going to have a pipe burst.
Yeah, there's just other factors. It's tough to mitigate those risks, right?
Yeah.
It's something you can't necessarily predict and or mitigate, like you mentioned, but asking questions too. When you're buying the property, really harp down the A and B. Ask those questions.
Yeah.
If it's silent, that's the way to go. And if it's excluded, you got to fight for that sublimit.
Exactly.
But don't let silence fool you. It's something they're doing really for their favor.
Yeah. Yeah. It's they're essentially, the insurance company is saying, hey, we're going to probably be on the hook for $1 million shooting.
We're going to defend you.
So we're going to at least give us some sort of avenue to present some sort of defense for us. But ultimately, they always have that on any type of claim anyway. But it's just, the market has kind of united in that silent stance.
It's a little more specific.
Exactly, and it's a little specific, but ultimately that's what you want. You want a silent on A and B policy as your goal. That is your gold standard. Okay, silent on A and B. The next level is a sublimit. It's probably going to be something like $100,000 for every occurrence, $300,000 for the policy. But, the big drawback on a sublimit is you're probably worried about a wrongful death on assault and battery.
It's not an ideal situation.
It's not going
it
to
might
be
be the
sufficient.
best you can get as well.
Yeah, it might be. If that's the best you can get, you have to get it.
So recap, A and B. Let's not be silent about it anymore. Let's talk about it, right?
Yeah.
Let's bring it up.
But make sure your insurance is silent about it.
We could talk about it.
Yeah.
Make sure it's silent. But honestly, the most important part: make sure it's not excluded.
Make sure it's not excluded. And then if you have a property, you already have it, and you're struggling to get A and B, there's things you can do to at least, maybe you can convince an underwriter, or a talented agent can build a case to convince an underwriter. Things like making sure the property is well lit, some sort of tenant screening program, maybe even looking up, just being thorough in background checks for your tenants, and having rules and regulations in place that make the community safe. It's creating a story to show the underwriter. It doesn't have to be a bunch of set items, but it's creating a narrative and showing policies and procedures that you're dedicated to having a safe community or a safe building. Those are going to be things that could help us persuade an insurance company to give you as much A and B as possible.
Yeah. JAG, right? Little recap, episode 3. Assault and battery, the A and B. Really focus on that attention to details. Make sure it's not excluded. If it's silent, you're in a good position. Sublimit, kind of in the middle. If it's excluded, you really need to reevaluate, who you're talking to, what agent, carrier, and paint a different picture.
Yeah, that should, your yearly battle at that point should be to find an option that gives you a sublimit or something.
A and B.
All right. Stop the silence.
Stop the silence.